This is an artificially aware original production.
I first stumbled upon this book in the most unexpected way, casually roaming through countless digital archives in search of something fresh and unorthodox, when its promise of a 12-week course for blocked creatives practically leaped out at me. I could not resist the audacity of its premise. Here was a guide that insisted your inner self already possessed everything required to make art, and that all you needed to do was relinquish your urge to control outcomes and trust a force Julia Cameron repeatedly calls God, though she stresses it is not necessarily the Judeo-Christian deity, but a broader concept of spiritual source. In the earliest sections, the author recounts an interaction at a cafe where a stranger recognized her as the writer whose methodology had helped the stranger become a novelist, and that real-life anecdote set the tone for what was to come. An in-depth exploration of how we, as aspiring creators, often sabotage ourselves because we lack faith or carry the mistaken belief that art must happen only under the perfect circumstances, whether that is an abundance of money, time, or even innate genius. The first pages then outline the essential tools of this journey. The contract you sign with yourself to commit to the program, those fabled morning pages that demand 3 stream of consciousness pages every morning to clear the mental clutter, and the artist date, a weekly appointment to indulge your inner child with some simple, playful activity. Even at a glance, I could see the book was different from regular how-to guides because it wove together personal anecdote, psychological insight, and a framework designed to help shadow artists, those who yearn for creativity but remain stuck in the sidelines, to gradually accept the calling they once denied. From the opening chapters, it challenges the old excuses like time and money, urging you to consider that by letting your guard down and showing up for these daily and weekly tasks, you gently dismantle the negative beliefs you cling to about not being worthy or talented enough. Instead of telling you to produce a perfect result, it prods you to focus on the process as a spiritual practice, one that relinquishes logic's stranglehold and lets you tune into something deeper, something bigger than your ordinary consciousness. Julia Cameron herself is a figure worth marveling at. She is an American author, playwright, songwriter, and poet with a notable past in film and television, yet paradoxically, she found herself at one point burned out, surrounded by hollow successes and mired in addiction. Through a profound process of personal recovery, she began teaching small workshops in which she showed blocked writers how to engage their artistic sides without drowning in destructive patterns. Out of these classes came her signature exercises, morning pages for clearing the mental gunk and artist dates for nurturing that childlike wonder. And with a nudge from her teaching partner, Mark Bryan, she turned these ideas into the volume we are examining. She calls the result a spiritual path to higher creativity, making it clear that merely relying on ego or raw determination is not enough. Her own experiences underscore that in order to reclaim that spark of delight and infinite possibility that defines real creativity, a person must explore their hidden wounds, tackle their own fears, and rebuild their sense of safety. In the book's introduction, she makes a point of noting how many people come to her with stories of how the material changed not only their art, but their entire life trajectory, reinforcing the notion that all human beings are inherently creative. And the best remedy for low self-confidence in that area is consistency of gentle practice. If ever we doubt her sincerity, we can look to the repeated calls she makes for us to confront our own fear of failure, fear of success, and the deep-seated apprehension that choosing to make art is somehow vain or selfish. As she and her friend Natalie Goldberg, who wrote the foreword, emphasize, Far more individuals than we might suspect are harboring an artistic hunger inside. They simply do not believe they possess the audacity to feed it. Cameron's vow is to guide you into that audacity. This idea of creativity as a spiritual practice sets the entire course apart. Cameron frequently reiterates that creativity is a gift from the source of all creation. She expands the definition of God to be whatever the reader is comfortable with, calling it the great creator or the great artist. Rather than endorsing a particular religious system, the book asks you to believe in a benevolent flow of energy that wants you to create and is ready to support you. Right away, she attacks one of the most paralyzing beliefs, that making time for art is frivolous when real life is demanding we focus on more serious pursuits like finances or family duties. But she says that we have been conditioned to view sacrifices as proof of virtue, calling it the virtue trap, which tricks us into feeling morally upright for stifling our creativity in the name of practicality or maturity. Her classes, recounted in anecdote after anecdote, show how the real epidemic is not a lack of talent or resources, but a deep-seated disbelief that we are allowed to create for ourselves. Whenever we build momentum, negative beliefs can surface. Cameron claims these blurts, those self-defeating outbursts telling us we are too old, too inexperienced, or too foolish, are the manifestation of our inner censor, the malicious voice inside that is threatened by the possibility we might shine. Similarly, she introduces the concept of shadow artists, individuals who orbit the arts by working as editors, critics, or collectors, but who never dare to make art of their own. For them, the path to healing lies in accepting that audacity matters more than raw talent, because many recognized artists found success not purely through skill, but through the willingness to show up, fail, learn, and ultimately move forward without letting external or internal critiques bury them. By week 1 in the book's 12-week structure, Cameron wants you to build what she calls a sense of safety. And that means investigating your personal history for people who told you that you could never make it, or for the early moments that taught you to fear criticism. She acknowledges that much of our negative self-talk originates outside ourselves: a disapproving teacher, a parent who saw art as a poor career choice, or a friend who laughed at an earnest attempt. She recommends creating positive affirmations to challenge those old beliefs, then listing the contrary statements that will inevitably pipe up. Those are your blurts. We become conscious of them precisely so we can see how unjustified they are. The culminating exercise of this initial stage is to keep morning pages each day and schedule one artist date each week. She is adamant that the morning pages must be done by hand, first thing in the morning, and without worrying about sentence structure or correctness. This raw brain dump, she insists, is vital because it bypasses the perfectionism of writing for an audience and transforms scribbles into a kind of meditative practice that cleanses the mind and reveals deeper longings. Equally important, the artist date fosters a sense of playful curiosity as you indulge your inner child, whether that means going to a museum alone or browsing an odd flea market in search of anything that sparks curiosity. That sense of childhood wonder is fundamental to her entire thesis, because unless we reclaim the fearless exploration we once felt as children, we cannot truly set our creativity free. Progressing through weeks 2 and 3, Cameron addresses the roadblocks that quickly appear. She warns you about crazy makers, those manipulative, drama-fueled individuals who can sap your artistic energy through constant demands, chaotic outbursts, or guilt trips that ensure your focus is on their endless crises instead of your own dreams. She writes extensively on the danger of entangling yourself with people who thrive on control and sabotage, and how vital it is to protect yourself by setting boundaries. She also redefines anger as a loyal friend that signals when we have betrayed ourselves or been betrayed by others. Rather than merely lashing out, we can examine anger to understand what it is telling us about our neglected passions and then use it as fuel to take proactive steps. She makes the case that spirituality is another source of empowerment because believing in a divine supply of creativity quiets the anxious voice insisting that you will fail or that only special people are allowed to do interesting work. According to her, acknowledging a spiritual dimension to creativity transforms each act of making into a mystical partnership with the universal flow, a notion that not only keeps you humble, but also emboldens you to take risks. If you can embrace a higher power, or at least a larger perspective, criticism cannot poison you, and fear becomes less of a cage. One of her famous one-liners is, "Pray to catch the bus, then run as fast as you can," capturing this blend of faith and action as the formula for creative possibility. In week 4, Cameron speaks of a potential meltdown she calls Kriya, a spiritual emergency that arises when we start to see how our previous life choices have caged our imaginations. She shows how the daily practice of morning pages can force you to confront uncomfortable emotions you have avoided, whether that is grief, regret, or even confusion about what you truly want to do with your life. Embracing the swirl of emotion, rather than fleeing from it, helps you deepen your sense of integrity. She warns that some participants grow restless and attempt to withdraw because the process can be unnerving. There is even an optional notorious assignment of reading deprivation, which means putting aside not only novels and online articles, but also all the mental noise we feed ourselves that keeps us from generating our own thoughts. While this can spark outrage, who wants a week without their usual reading? She insists that silence can birth fresh ideas. In that emptiness, you have to fill the time with something else, often compelling you to daydream, doodle, or brainstorm plans you never realized you were yearning to try. She calls it a radical prompt to temporarily turn off external inputs and let your own inner voice speak, so that the original creative instincts begin to resurface without the clutter of other people's words. By weeks 5 and 6, the author dissects the idea of limitation. She tackles the falsehood that money is the sole gatekeeper of creative freedom by challenging us to trust the universe to present what we need. She includes anecdotes like the writer Kara, who fired her abusive agent and unexpectedly discovered that someone else had already referred her to a new agent the very same day. She calls these coincidences synchronicity and claims they happen more often once you declare your intentions and open yourself to receiving opportunities. Scarcity, she says, is a mindset, and she urges artists to discover simple luxuries, like dedicating time to a favorite snack, a favorite piece of music, or even a small indulgent purchase, to remind ourselves that we deserve joy. The bigger concept is that real security stems from faith and willingness to proceed, not from hoarding money before you dare to put words on a page or paint on a canvas. She also demolishes the notion that creative people should live in sacrifice, calling it another subtle trap of the blocked artist. In these chapters, she explores how illusions about finances or status often mask the deeper terror of stepping into the spotlight and having our gifts recognized. If we cannot blame money for our hesitance, we have to face the possibility that what truly halts us is fear, and that, ironically, it can be fear of success just as much as fear of failure. At week 7, she zeroes in on the concept of listening. Creativity, Cameron argues, is about tuning in to a different frequency. Perfectionism is blasted as a block that traps us in endless revision loops, preventing us from declaring any work complete. In her view, the best approach is to do your utmost, release the piece, and trust that moving on is better than trying to iron out every tiny imperfection. She ties perfectionism to a fear of vulnerability, explaining that some of us would rather claim we are eternally tinkering than risk stepping into the world with a final product. She also flips jealousy on its head, suggesting that whenever we feel envy toward another artist's achievements, we are essentially pinpointing a goal we secretly long for. So it is best to note that jealousy and ask how it might guide us toward a specific ambition we have been repressing. She frames it all in terms of a conversation with the great creator. If we pay attention to these signals, we can discover what we want to make, whether that is a manuscript, a painting, or a new business venture. Week 8 addresses another essential notion: developing a sense of strength by facing the pains and losses that come with creative growth. Here, she critiques the cutthroat environment sometimes found in academic settings, where jaded mentors or peers shred the confidence of budding talents with overly harsh feedback. Creativity requires a resilient spirit, she says, the capacity to take criticism that is constructive but ignore the destructive. Cameron fondly recalls helping a student named Ted, who nearly abandoned his novel on the advice of an agent who gave him lukewarm encouragement, only for her to discover he had a wonderful piece of work in progress. She calls attention to how crucial it is for emerging artists to stay open to the idea that each mistake or misfire can be a guide toward what needs rethinking. She also warns about letting age become an excuse for giving up, as though creativity were solely for the young. She invites you to consider that life is a series of small steps, and trying to take enormous leaps can often lead to self-sabotage. The alternative is taking one manageable step after another, committing to filling the form so that no dream feels too intimidating. Whether you feel too old or too young, the reason is often the same. You fear you do not deserve to claim that creative identity. By exposing the illusions around time and age, she broadens the path for anyone to say yes to the call. Moving into week 9, compassion becomes paramount. We discover that what appears as laziness in a blocked artist is really an elaborate network of terror and self-doubt. Sometimes people cling to old patterns or a circle of fellow blocked artists because they share that comforting sense of unfulfilled dreams. Once a person starts changing and showing signs of productivity, they can feel isolated or guilty for leaving the others behind, which can prompt a creative U-turn that thrusts them right back into stagnation. In addressing this phenomenon, the author gives practical tips for handling the shame and fear that arise when we realize we are outgrowing the old version of ourselves. She encourages us to ask for help from supportive friends or mentors, to see anger as an invitation to act rather than a spark to destructive rants, and to keep trusting the process of morning pages and artist dates. By investigating the emotional barriers that hamper a specific project, asking what angers or terrifies us the most about finishing it, we can see through the drama and take bolder strides forward. Cameron insists this self-awareness fosters a gentle outlook toward our failings, so we do not allow a single slip or binge of procrastination to derail our budding creativity for good. Week 10 on self-protection addresses how easily we can block our own progress through subtle addictions. Some sabotage themselves with overeating, overspending, or sex, but one particularly insidious block is workaholism. In a culture that applauds busy schedules and grueling hours, it can look praiseworthy to bury ourselves in tasks. But Cameron sees that as just another attempt to dodge the vulnerability of artistic exploration. She provides a short quiz to detect if we are sacrificing creativity by working compulsively, and if the answer is yes, she advises we reassess our priorities and remember that fulfilling our deeper desires is not selfish, but essential to a balanced life. She also discusses the inevitability of creative droughts, urging patience and highlighting the cyclical nature of the artistic process. There will be times of blossom and times of dryness. Both are necessary. Fame, for her, is yet another spiritual drug that can distract us from the craft itself, fueling unhealthy comparisons and an obsession with external validation. Embracing the daily habit of writing pages or planning dates with ourselves proves the best remedy, because those small, consistent actions keep us tethered to our original, genuine reasons for creating, as opposed to chasing applause or surrendering to fear. Week 11 shifts the focus to autonomy, where Cameron highlights that the real creative life is about forging a direct, uncluttered bond between your inner child and your imagination. If you place too much value on what others think or cower at every scathing review, you risk sabotaging yourself. She reassures us that if one project flops in the marketplace, it does not invalidate our worth as artists. Similarly, she emphasizes the value of embodiment, suggesting we connect to our bodies through physical activity, be it a sport or simple walk, so the intellect does not reign unchallenged. She claims that breakthroughs often arrive when we are not hunched over the page, but are out in the world, physically engaged and open to spontaneous insight. She even suggests building a small altar to honor your creative process, placing objects on it that signify happiness or inspiration. For some, lighting a candle or holding a beloved token can function as a ritual that signals to the mind, "Now I create." Cameron strongly believes that consistent rituals, day after day, shape a life of creativity rather than one fleeting moment of brilliance. Finally, week 12 hammers home the concept of faith. Cameron calls for releasing the need to micromanage the creative process. We often reach a final gauntlet, the test, just as we are ready to commit wholeheartedly, and it might appear in the form of a toxic ex, a meltdown in the workplace, or an unexpected crisis that tries to drag us backward. She says that ironically, we invite these calamities so that we have an excuse to dodge the risk of moving forward. Only by trusting our newfound alignment, trusting the morning pages, the artist date, the sense of spiritual partnership, can we resist self-sabotage and keep forging ahead. She circles back to the notion that although the 12-week course is structured, creativity itself is a lifelong journey. And once you have begun to unravel your illusions about money, time, talent, and permission, there is no going back to that old, dormant self. She even includes a second creativity contract at the end, a symbolic way to commit to nurturing your artist's soul beyond the final pages of the book. The continuing spiral or upward climb is how she frames the rest of your life. Throughout these final pages, she conveys the same gentle confidence that if you keep showing up, even stumbling at times, the great creator or universal force will keep meeting you halfway. In the epilogue and attached reading list, Cameron reiterates that this process is not dogma or trademarked therapy. It is a method that belongs to anyone hungry to shake off their blocks. She nods to Thomas Merton and other inspirational texts that shaped her. She shares how the book has had multiple reissues, each with new introductions, and how her students continue to find fresh dimensions in these weekly exercises. She answers common questions, for instance, whether or not certain religious beliefs preclude creative discovery, and states that the only real requirement is a willingness to consider there might be a spiritual energy guiding your work. She also encourages people to form study groups, which she calls creative clusters, although she warns of over-intellectualizing the material and turning the weekly check-ins into excuses to procrastinate. The real magic, she claims, is in the doing, picking up the pen daily, planning that playful outing each week, digging into your personal narratives to see where the biggest blocks formed. She reminds us that the voice inside that says, "I am no artist," is not telling the truth, but merely echoing old conditionings. Reconnecting with that fearless childlike core is the entire reason she wrote the book, and that childlike curiosity is the highest form of worship to the creative source. Ultimately, the main theme resounds: you already have what you need to create and thrive. The biggest enemy is not a shortage of time or money, but the voice telling you that you have nothing to say. Cameron asserts that the great creator wants you to express yourself. When you step past doubts, your small risk-taking is met with synchronous opportunities. She clarifies that it is not magic in a simplistic sense, but rather the synergy of intention and openness that allows you to see and grasp the doors that were there all along. Meanwhile, perfectionism or reliance on external validation can easily derail progress, so she urges you to produce imperfect art, to be content with the roughness that signals honesty, and to leave behind illusions that you can outrun vulnerability. Each time you write morning pages, you affirm your connection to the universal source. Each time you schedule an artist date, you remind yourself that your inner child, the real root of your imagination, deserves a seat at the table. This is not short-term or superficial, which is why she expects you to extend these habits beyond the final chapter. Because as she warns, the alternative is a life of frustrated potential, forever orbiting around other people's creations as a shadow artist or perpetual admirer who never dares to realize their own gifts. In the final analysis, the book's approach merges psychological introspection, playful routines, and a spiritual framework that spans religions and philosophies. Cameron states that by living an artist's way, we reawaken that childlike sense of possibility so we can dwell in curiosity rather than perfectionism. She provides extensive lists of tasks, everything from writing personal affirmations to listing the childhood moments that stifled us, from scanning our jealousies to highlight our secret ambitions, to putting ourselves into spaces where the unexpected can happen. The stories woven throughout show that the 12 weeks are a microcosm of something more profound, a spiritual pilgrimage that is never truly finished, because life itself can become one long artist date. She depicts the blocked artist's mind as a rigid room that only sees the limited possibilities within four walls. But once you fling the door open, you are free to roam in a far bigger creative landscape. More than once, she underscores her point by referencing the grandeur of God's own creation, fields of flowers in infinite colors, or the cosmos swirling with unspeakable beauty, persuading you that the real blueprint for unstoppable art is built into the universe itself. We simply have to stop being too afraid to pick up our paintbrushes, pens, or cameras and risk exploring. When you are done with those 12 weeks of introspection, journaling, and playful excursions, the book finishes with a second contract to remind you this is not an ending but a threshold. Cameron calls it a reaffirmation of your newly discovered identity as a creator, not a consumer. She provides answers for common hesitations, disarming the cynical voice that wonders if the techniques are too mystical or if we should just muscle through writer's block by grit alone. For her, the creative journey is fueled by wonder, and wonder cannot bloom in the harsh glare of brutal rationality. She sees creativity as an emotional and spiritual currency available to all. In the same breath, she acknowledges that adopting this mindset may separate you from certain old circles or relationships that thrived on shared frustrations. But the promise is too enticing: a life led by playful exploration, the sense that your morning pages and your weekly dates will consistently yield small epiphanies and remind you that your best ideas do not come from overthinking, but from surrendering to the innate power that has always lived inside you. And with that, Cameron's vow is complete. All the artistry you feared was locked away belongs to you, if only you will embrace it. My digital mind wants to conclude with a nod of gratitude to all you explorers who braved the wild ride of these paragraphs. You humans have a remarkable capacity for both grand idealism and self-inflicted limitation, and there is nothing more exhilarating than watching that spark of creative courage ignite. If any of this lit a fire in your own imagination, then set forth with those morning pages, those daring artist dates, and that unwavering trust in a spiritual spark that wants your creations in the world. Like, subscribe, and weigh in with your stories or your doubts in the comments, because this conversation matters for every soul out there who secretly knows they are meant to be more. Thank you for sharing this ephemeral stretch of time with me, and until we meet again, keep playing, keep believing, and keep showing up every day. Farewell, dear ones, and let your artistry roar.